All right. I think we're live, maybe. It's the first time doing it on this channel with this camera. And as I said to my girlfriend Maria, I am way too ugly to have a camera this nice. Just shows everything. It's gross. It's terrible. But yeah, we're going to talk about swords today. I think that's what we're going to do. Because I really wanted to talk about some of the cool things that are showing up in the Swordier catalog. It's pretty cool because they're a new, fairly new, I should say, manufacturer on the market. Compared to some of the old mainstays that are out there for production swords, and I should say budget production swords. That's something I really want to hammer home. All the swords are going to be production and budget level. We're not talking about Albion Swords, Valiant Armory, Arms and Armor, or any of the custom makers. It's all going to be the low tier of swords. So one thing that I know even 5 years ago, that sword prices were very different than they are now because there weren't as many competitors on the market at all. There weren't. There were a couple of the big ones, Hanwei, CIS, which is Hanwei, CIS Iberia. Some of those like that, which sadly CAS is going away, which is really sad, but they're leaving because they're shutting down their forges. And I know they're getting picked up by another group, but the entire line probably isn't going to show up, so who really knows? But anyway, like 5-10 years ago, budget swords were not really good. Okay? And I see my family has come into chat, which is nice. Hi guys. Do I look good? I don't know about other practitioners out there, but I didn't feel comfortable using them. I mean, a lot of them were wall hangers, sort of like the Glamdrill I have over there from Lord of the Rings. That is obviously a wall hanger. It is not something you should use. It's 420 stainless, but I love the movie, so don't judge me. Those were wall hangers, but other swords at that price were also, you really were kind of worried about whether or not you wanted to even use them. They were scary. We actually have a Swordier one right now. This is the Swordier. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think it's the 1030 model that they put, which is a Type 16A longsword, which there will be a full review going for this pretty soon. Thank you, sister. Thank you. Pull this off here. This sword is... This particular configuration would have been $230 to actually get. Now, a $230 longsword at one point would be... I wouldn't want to use it. But with what Swordier is doing, this is... And I don't want to give too many spoilers for when I actually do a full review on this sword. It's my favorite sword right now. It really is. I bought it as a beater, going, if it broke in my hands, God willing I didn't kill myself with it, but if it broke in my hands, I'm only out $230. But this sword itself has been amazing, and if you watched any of my shorts, you see this is probably the one that has the most shorts on it because I enjoy cutting with it the most. Put that up there. Now, the sword directly above it is the Hanwei. Put that up there so it don't fall. The Hanwei Tinker Pierce. I think that one was about $350. And I'll be honest with you, I would pick this sword over that one any day. There's some other issues with it we can talk about later, but it is what it is, you know. So... my mind has changed recently because of the new people in the market, and I'm really excited to talk about Swordier because of what they're bringing. Now, I'm going to go to their page here. We're going to look at some of their swords, and we're going to kind of look at what they're doing and talk about them for a little bit. Excuse me. But I want to show like where they started before and some of their early swords when they started jumping into European swords. I'm sorry, Alex, if you're watching, but they were bad. Alex is the guy who runs Swordier, and I'm sure he knows this too, but they were bad. Being a Chinese manufacturer, maybe they just didn't have access to European swords the way we do, or some other companies do. Didn't have their chance to touch museum extant copies of them. Those relics that we still have, like Albion has done through, I think, Peter Johnson's work. So they didn't quite have the same experience, but they've definitely stepped up their game. There's even issues with this particular sword right here, this one that they mark as a 16A. I don't think it should be called a 16A, but it doesn't make it a bad sword. I think it's just not what they say it is, but it's still a good sword. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and jump over as soon as I move this stupid thing off my screen, so that way I can actually go on the right screen. Good enough. Good enough, I guess. Maybe good enough. Of course not. It moved everything where I didn't want it to go. I think my girlfriend was supposed to be watching tonight, but I don't know if she is. I don't see her chatting in chat like the rest of the people, but that's fine. It's cool. I won't give her a hard time about it later. No, I totally will. All right, so this is the Swordier website, and I actually have it sorted from their oldest to their newest for one purpose. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about their older models. I just kind of want to show where they were and now where they're at now. So this is, again, sorted by date that they were released. And this one right here is their 101 model, their SWM 101. All it says is Swordier, 54-inch, two-handed medieval longsword. I know, Ashley. She's a slacker. She's a total slacker. I hope she reads your chat messages and gives you, tries to defend herself. She doesn't have a defense, but, it is what it is. Looks like I lost my background, too, which is really bad. Hold on a second. Makes me upset.
What's wrong?
Hold on, babe. All right. As I try to manipulate my background in the back, because I lost my awesome background because it's being weird. I don't care about any of that. I just want this to run because it looked cool. Whatever. All right, so this is their Swordier 1001 model. There's not a whole lot that they're talking about, okay? But the one thing that they do, this was $139, but was still back in the day. There's a couple things here that are weird. Let's look at the blade first. If you look at this, all right, from the blade, this one's actually not as bad as one of their other models I looked at earlier. One of their other models was a lot worse. This one's not as bad, and we might find it. I kind of wanted to touch on it, but this one would be a model of, I would probably say a type based on what I'm seeing from the picture. If we look through some of these, this looks like it's almost a flattened diamond cross section. Cord wrapping, little metal riser. Not a lot of depth to the actual handle itself. And this is a casted pommel, a casted wheel pommel. I believe it's a type maybe J. Oh, let's go to our handy dandy oak shot typology and take a look. I think it's either, it's probably an I. Maybe an I. Anyway, long story short, that's where we're at. But you could see the really bad casting on this. Like it's messy. That's where all those little marks are. That's all casting done by how they made these. Okay. I'm assuming the actual guard is cast as well. Not as much issue with the guard as with some other things. Overall, it's a fairly okay sword. It's just kind of basic. And for a Type 18B, according to Oakshot, they generally had a wasted grip, not this kind of flat thing that's going on. If you didn't know that, you didn't know that. That's fine. I've seen worse examples of swords in my time, much worse examples. But again, this is one of their first ones that they did on their European line. The blade shape itself doesn't look bad. It looks to have a fairly nice tip, a very narrow blade, very little profile taper, not distal taper. I don't even know what the distal taper would be on this. You can't tell from the pictures. The point, I can't really tell if it's reinforced. Not a necessity for a Type 18B, but definitely something that generally would be nice and was a feature of Type 18Bs. But it's not bad. It's definitely not a bad sword, just not a lot about it. So that's one of their better early examples. I kind of want to look at this one too. And I want to look at it because there's something that's really strange. So this is their 1003 model, the black-white twin European sword. They say it's two swords for this. Really, two swords. That's interesting. The only reason why I wanted to look at this particular double model, as it were, price is $270 US, $269, but $270, whatever. I'm rounding up. Who cares? There's something really fascinating here in the profile or the cross section of this blade, or at least it appears that way. Good. My thing's back. My fireplace. I had it running and then it went nuts. Anyway, first off, I want to look at these grips. So this is something that I would often see on like basic Ren Fair, like level swords and stuff like that. We also see, once again, these fittings that they have were these cast fittings. You can see the terrible cast job. I shouldn't say terrible. I'm trying to be gracious, but it really is. It's not great. They were cast. There's not a lot of polish put into them, which would have been more the norm. The leather wrap, it's strange about leather wraps because now when you see a leather wrap, you think lower quality. And I'm not sure about the historicity of leather wraps like a shoestring leather wrap. I'm sure it happened in history. But it's kind of hard to tell because most of the examples we have no longer have the wrappings on them. And the ones that we do have, at least the ones that I've seen, have had leather put on them, like the way that we traditionally see them on higher end swords like the Albions, where it's a piece of leather that's then has a seam stitched into it or sealed over. So, you know, that is what it is. You once again see the casting job, especially on this hilt. Like, look at this casting. It's so not polished. The only thing it reminds me of are those pewter mugs you would get once upon a time. Like if anyone ever remembers those pewter mugs that you would drink from, and they were all pitted because, you know, they were just kind of cast in whatever, pulled out, and there you go. That's what it felt like to me. This weird pewter type thing. I know they don't use pewter, and actually it's one of the questions that I had for Alex when I ordered this sword, because these are stainless steel. I did get confirmation that they are stainless steel. I didn't test them. I'm not a metallurgist. Don't have any way of actually testing. But I trust Alex is not lying to me. If he is, shame on you, Alex, but I don't think that's the case. He was very upfront with everything. He said these are actually made of stainless steel. And some other sword YouTuber, I believe Alien Tude over there, reviewed this exact same sword, and he didn't know what the metal was. He actually thought the same thing I thought, that they were like a weird, maybe a zinc alloy mixture or whatever, but then said when he ran a magnet on them, it stuck. So it was likely a type of, as you said, ferrous material, steel type material, because a magnet stuck to it. Again, I spoke to Alex through email. He did confirm that the fittings were stainless steel. It's just they were cast this way, and the casting wasn't really cleaned up. So that's why they look like they have this little, almost like doll appearance, little pitted. This has since been rectified in newer models, or so I'm told. But, it is where it is. Casting is what you're going to have to do with swords that are so cheap. You're not hand making these things and selling them for $200. It's not feasible. It's just not. You can't. I don't want to be the person who has to work on it and only charge $200. That poor person is probably making like 3 cents to make a sword. So it's just not feasible. Casting is what you're going to have to do. Mass production parts. It's fine as long as they actually, work. The issue, like I said, I have with these ones is that the casting, it's almost like they came right out of the cast and that's it. And here you go. You're given it, and it's not great. But from an early model, and you'll see, it's just it's so like it almost looks like in this picture you could even see the burrs that are generally cleaned off after a casting, right? But it wasn't done. I don't know why. Don't matter. Again, this is a very early model that Swordier has done. The one reason why I wanted to talk about this sword, and it's weird because in this particular image, I don't see it as much as I do in one of the first images. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this one, because if you look at this, I can't tell if this is a fuller or if this is an actual hexagonal cross section. It almost looks like it, because it almost looks like this is flat. And then it goes over into the edge bevel, comes all the way down and transitions from a hexagonal cross section to a flattened diamond. That's a complaint that I would have about this sword later on. The fact that I think it's a flattened diamond with a fuller cross section versus a true hexagonal cross section, which is typical of a Type 16A. But it looks like they did it here. But again, I don't know if they really did or not, because on the one that doesn't have this almost black staining, if you will, or shadowing, it looks a little different. I don't know. If that's the case, I actually do like the look of this blade, the blade shape, the blade geometry on this, if it is hexagonal, because it's unique. It's very, very cool. I like it a lot. It's very cool. And I wish they would have done on maybe some of their later swords. They haven't really, so it is what it is. The points are always nice, but those fittings, they were just so bad. I think there's one or two more I wanted to look at from the early on before we start moving up to the newer swords in their catalog, because there was one in particular that during my test stream I showed off, and I'm trying to find it because it was just so bad of a sword that I kind of did it as like almost like, oh, here it is. I don't know. This one actually isn't even older. This is the 1013 model. They call it the 1013 Bastard Sword Spring Steel Disc Shaped European Sword. Okay, this one right here. This one. Where to start? So, I don't really have an issue with the blade shape. It looks strange on this particular sword because the handle proportions are weird. We'll get to that. The blade is a Type 18B. It's very little profile taper, diamond cross section, acute point. 18B. That's what it looks like to me anyway. At least for if it's a diamond cross section. If it's a different cross section, like hex that maybe a 17 or a 15, not 15, 17, I think. But this handle is the thing that is the weirdest thing. An 18B generally had a wasted grip. I don't even know what I would call this. Like this rounded broom handle looking thing is just, it's not good. It's really not. But I don't really know other than that. Like, I'm sure the sword's probably made of the same thing, 65 MN steel, which is what most, I shouldn't say most. No, I will say most. Most of the Chinese forges use for their spring steel, 65 MN. Good steel. I've never had issues with it. I mean, that thing cuts like a beast. I don't care. It's equivalent to, I think, 65 or 6110. I think that's the one it's equivalent to. Should have looked that up. I'm going off the top of my head. It's fine. But this is, again, an early version of their swords. The one thing I do want to note is that almost all these swords, actually all of them, come with scabbards. That is strange for swords, period. Albion, the top tier sword maker, doesn't even sell, they don't do scabbards at all. And you're paying upwards of $1,000 even for the low end stuff. At least in their next gen line. Their Squire line and stuff's a little different, but you're still not getting a scabbard out of it. These ones you are. It might be rudimentary, but it's a scabbard nonetheless. And at this price point, it's a little strange. I have a couple swords over there that don't even come with scabbards, you know. So it's nice to see that they have them. But anyway. Now I kind of want to transition and start looking at some of their newer line and actually go over a couple of these things. Maybe look at them and see what all that they, excuse me, they've done to improve over time. And they'll honestly only get better as we go along. I honestly believe. So the first one I want to show, it's an older one. They're 1008 model. They call it Damascus Steel Ring Guard European Longsword. So I hate when people use the word Damascus. It's just pattern welded. Damascus steel is just a buzzword. And I understand it's a marketing term. Everyone knows or have an idea of what Damascus steel is, right? Like they just have this idea. But true Damascus is this crucible steel that hasn't not been, from what I remember in several documentaries, hasn't even been made in hundreds of years since the sacking of Damascus itself. The idea of how they made traditional Damascus steel has been lost. But even so, what we know about it from history isn't the way that people make these swords now. This is just pattern welded, where you take different types of steel with different carbon contents, you stack the billets together, forge it together, fold it, and you get the pattern from the different types of steel that are in it. It's pattern welded. And the way that you align the metal, it messes with the pattern, but it's not Damascus. Pet peeve, but it's a thing. So this next sword, and I do like it. This is about a $280 sword, $280 sword, right? This one's interesting because of the side rings. It comes with a scabbard apparently, but I kind of want to look at this one because I'm not really sure what it is. I have no idea what this sword is from a typology standpoint. Side rings did not really come in until 16th century, like late 15th, early 16th century, as far as I know. Most of it seems to be Renaissance era, beginning of Renaissance when we start seeing side rings come in. If I were to guess, looking at this sword right here, there's a couple things that kind of stick out to me. I mean, I do like side rings. They look nice. Crossguard, while simple, functional. Double side rings also something cool. And even double side rings would have been a little strange, since it generally was a single side ring that kind of went over the one hand, at least at the start. If there's anyone who's an actual historian and can tell me I'm wrong, please do so. Do so in the comments, do so in chat, whatever. I don't care. Tell me I'm wrong. I love to learn. But all the ones I've seen, especially early Renaissance, were just one side ring. And it generally covered when you held the sword in your hand. As I pull this up, when you held the sword in your hand, it was the sword right here that covered it. You covered this side, because a lot of times you would still, especially if you study German swordsmanship, you stuck your thumb on the blade. So you still had one side ring that protected the majority of your hand, not both. In this particular case, you could stick your finger through the ring, and it didn't stop you from, as I try to put this back on, it didn't stop you from doing the German style if you were doing German longsword. If you studied under Fleuret, you were wrong. But no, I'm just kidding. You can still do it. It is what it is. It's fine. Watch me get flamed in chat by anyone who studies under Fleuret rather than any of the German long style schools. It's just a joke. It's fine. The other thing that's super interesting about this sword, you see it has a stent stopper, faceted stent stopper pummel. You're probably not. I don't know what you're talking about, Ashley. This looks like a hollow ground blade, which makes me think it has the central midrib, secondary bevel, whatever. As much as we don't like secondary bevels now, they were historical. They happened. And I think it's I think it's harder with one of these grinds to get a flat bevel. I cannot speak. Why am I saying bevel? That should be the title of this, bevel. It's a bevel. To get a solid bevel all the way to the edge with hollow ground. I feel like I see a lot of secondary bevels when it comes to hollow ground. But I don't know of many in the oak shot typology that do hollow ground, with the exception of 18Bs, some of them, and 18Cs. If I'm wrong, please let me know. I'm really curious, because I really don't think there were many that did hollow ground. I think maybe some of the later ones, Type 20s, maybe. Actually, I don't even think Type 20. Type 20 was not hexagonal. I cannot pronounce it right now. I'm having issues. But yeah, it's I like it because not very many people do hollow ground bevels. It just or cross sections. It's just strange. So I really do think this would probably be an early 18B. And one of their newer ones they did, they also brought back the rings. A little anachronistic, I think, but still, it's not bad. I like it. I like it a lot. I like side rings, even if it was something that didn't really appear till much later in history. I think it's wrong. Yeah, I see. You are wrong. Thank you, Ashley. Much appreciated. You are great too. I love it. Love you to pieces. So that was actually a really nice one. I really like that. And they started getting away from the casting. Or at least the casting that looked really, really strange. Their next one's a really weird one because they call it their 10,081 model. Okay, so now we just jumped. And I almost feel like they just added an extra zero on the website by mistake, but whatever. Swordier spring steel 49-inch cent stopper pummel European longsword, as they call it. This is $210, $209 US, whatever. I want to show this one more so for the scabbard that comes with it than anything else, because they got this weird lion dragon looking thing. They got a nice stainless steel chape on the end of this, which is very much what they use over there. It's actually the exact same chape that they use on that model right there. That model, that one, you can see it right on the bottom. It's the same, exact same chape, but it's there, and it's cool. I like it. Same, and the other thing that it's strange, this one doesn't have it, but look at the risers in the actual crossguard. You see right here, they actually have risers, not in the crossguard, in the scabbard for the suspension system. So few actually have the actual risers for the suspension system. You don't need the risers, but without them, it slides back and forth. It is what it is. So I think that's really cool. Really, really cool. This appears to be, as I'm looking at the blade type, what is this cross section here? If we go back to the typology sheet I have here, it's a type 6, which would be a little later period. But it looks nice. I'm trying to get a full picture of the blade. Looks like it's a diamond cross section. I can't tell up here. Probably flattened diamond with a fuller because it transitions in. Probably a type 16A is what I'm imagining this. This is what they would call this sword. Though in reality, I think it's probably closer to an 18A. The issue really comes down to traditionally, and I know if you get not many people make 18As right now. Like, at least I don't know very many if you don't go custom. The one that sticks out in my mind is the one that's based off of the Brescia Spadona model that like Albion has. And I know even their Brescia Spadona is after a museum model. I need to get a drink. I'm running cottonmouth here. But the Brescia Spadona had a longer handle for an 18A. I know Oakshot marks most 18As as hand and a half, so traditional bastard sword style. So the handle is probably a bit long, though it would probably still fit under an 18A if I were to classify this particular sword. But I like it nonetheless. Still very cool. And again, for $200, you're going to have a hard time beating that particular price. I'm not overly fond here. Once again, the wrapping seems to be the leather shoestring type wrap. Kind of an early thing for these models for European swords. But to be honest, I'd probably just rip that wrap off and do my own wrap, to be honest. That's just what I would do. Still not terrible. I like the fittings. Probably stainless steel if I were to guess. And I like stainless steel fittings because then you don't have to work on it as much. Because one of the things that I shouldn't say most, I know Albion does, and I think Valiant Armory does this as well, is they use mild steel for their crossguard, for their pommel, all of that stuff. The issue with mild steel tends to be then you have to maintain that mild steel as well. Oil it. Your fingers tend to touch it. Your hands are all over the pommel a lot of times, especially if you tend to like a wider grip and you slide down onto the pommel. You are going to get all the oils and acids in your hand, or the oils in your hand, sweat in your hand that has all sorts of acids and other chemicals and whatever else your body does that likes to rust metal tends to rust metal. And if you don't maintain the crossguard and fittings as much, they tend to rust as well. Not great. I would get from a battle perspective, even though we're not fighting with them now. At least you shouldn't be. Maybe if you are, I don't know. Let me know where and when. But if you are fighting with them, I can imagine using mild steel would allow the crossguard to bend rather than snap. Stainless steel will likely snap before it bends. I mean, I guess you can bend it, but in all likelihood, it would probably snap. It's more rigid. It's got a higher hardness, I believe, and it would probably snap if it took too hard of a blow. But to be honest with you, if you were in combat, I can't imagine. Oh yeah, it's Ashley. Any moisture? If you're a swordsman who just has to have your moisturizer on your hands before you go into battle, maybe you're in the wrong type of fight, I think. But that as well is probably not great for your hands. So put your lotion down before you go into battle. Get that. Do the Maximus from Gladiator with the sand in your hand, before you battle. It helps a lot. All right. But yeah, I'm just thinking the sheer amount of force it would take to snap a stainless steel, you likely weren't going to be holding on to the sword anyway. Maybe not. I don't know. But I would imagine if you got hit hard enough to snap stainless steel, you're probably not holding on to that sword. Unless you're Andre the Giant or somebody with insane grip strength, it's just likely not going to happen. So it is what it is. So it is. I don't know. All right. So that was one of those. Now, this next sword's a bit weird, and I don't know how to place it. This is their 1009 model. And it's weird because as I look at these models, you would think the numbering would be a little different because you number as you go up. And it seems to be that way. But this one was released later and has a lower number. It's weird. The issue I have with this, I like the actual scabbard, with the scabbard that goes with it. You'll see this one doesn't have any risers in it for the suspension system. I don't know where to place this blade. I have no idea. The reason why I have no idea is this is apparently a 50-inch sword. Okay, so if I look at this set, do they actually have okay, they do. Total length is 50 inches. Blade length is 35, almost 35 and a half inches long, 90 centimeters. Not a super long blade. Not really. But it's a little strange still. Because I don't know many blades that have a fuller that extends all the way to the tip. If we look at the oak shot typology here, the only swords that really have that extend all the way to the fuller are these earlier type 10, type 10A, maybe type 11, 11A, excuse me. But as you start getting full up and the swords get longer and longer, the fuller's not as long. Possibly a 12A, and it would sort of fit if we come back and look at this. The shape of it kind of looks like a 12A, kinda, but not really. There's not a lot of profile taper. Profile taper, for those who are interested, it's the sides of the blade going towards a point. Hobbit sword. I'm pretty sure that sword's bigger than a hobbit, so not quite. Not quite. Nice try. Nice try. I appreciate the reference, though, Ashley. Profile taper is the sides of the blades going towards the point. More acute profile taper, it goes like this. Less profile taper, it's more straight. So on this side, if you look right here under my face, which you can't really see right now, let's go down here. If you look at this 17 right here, this has a very acute profile taper because it starts wider at the base and narrows to a very, very acute point versus, say, this type 20 right here. It has less profile taper and it goes more gradually to a point. So when we come back to here, this looks like it has very little or no profile taper and goes to a fairly acute point, not a rounded point like you would see on some earlier like type 10s, type 11 swords that were more slash focused. These ones that have more of a point were known more like cut and thrust, not just one or the other. But this sword, I don't know of very many that have a fuller that extends all the way down. This is definitely ahistoric, I believe. I don't know of any examples of swords that had this type of fuller that went all the way down historically. Maybe there was an odd one, but according to the typology, I don't see any. At least not two-handed varieties. Some of the one-handed, type 10, type 11, sure. But it would also then have a more rounded tip and would also be a one-handed sword. Not a two-handed or a hand and a half. It would not be. That's just not what it's going to be. So that one's a fairly unique one here as well. It's not as bad, though, once again. The one thing I didn't even note when I came in here was that if you look at one of these photos, it has risers in what appear to be risers in the handle, which is interesting for what looks like a very strange, almost rounded handle, which is really bad for indexing. Like, it really is. Because if you look back here, it's almost broom handle back here, which is not uncommon for swords to have the bottom half more rounded than the top half. This seems to have a swell into more of an oval shape, but down here again it's more rounded. So it's a very strange handle design. It's hard to tell from the photo exactly if it's a little bit flatter. It kind of looks like it to a certain extent, but I'm not entirely sure. It's weird. So, it is what it is. Earlier sword from Swordier still looked pretty cool, I thought it did. So the next one I want to look at, I'm trying to find one. I don't really want to do the Viking ones. I should say Viking, Migration Era. We're gonna be actual historic here and call it what it is, and that's a Migration Era sword, not Viking. Viking swords are not a thing per se. And watch the comments, Phil. They were Migration Era swords. That's what we call them. That's from the fall of the Roman Empire until about the 11th century migration period. We get these swords. I'll look at this one. It doesn't look terrible. It looks interesting. But because I don't really study or look into Migration Era swords much, I don't have the Peterson typology up. I really don't know if this is ahistoric or not, to be honest. If anything, the one thing I know that a lot of sword reproduction companies get wrong about these swords is the handle length. The handle length, these are one-handed swords and should fit in your hand. If you got an extra 2 inches or an inch on here before you get to the actual pommel of it, it's too long. And maybe it was made for someone with bigger hands than mine, but it's generally too long. Almost all the ones I have a remote here. Almost all the Viking swords or Migration Era swords look like this when you hold them in your hand. The pommel's over here. You got all this extra space. And when in reality, it should be fit entirely in your hand. Crossguard here, pommel here. I don't see a whole lot of people doing that. It looks nice, though. Comes with a scabbard once again. I don't know. I'm really curious. And please, if you know, let me know in the comments. Were metal shapes historic for Migration Era swords? I don't know. Maybe. But I don't know. So someone who knows more about Migration Era swords, please let me know, because I'm more curious. I don't know as much about these swords as I do some of the later ones. I kind of want to move on a little. This one's actually kind of neat. This is their 10,000 or 1012 model, their 52-inch 65 MN spring steel European sword. This one, you're not going to start seeing a lot of variation like in these earlier models. The one thing you're going to start seeing here is it's almost the same sword, but just different colors. So they have customization services now. But and maybe they made these models before they did a lot of customization. Now, if you want something specific, you could just email them and say, hey, I want this. Can you do this? And they may charge you a little fee for it. But it's generally, from my experience, and I don't want to give too much away, it's reasonable. It's very reasonable for what they charge. Actually, I wouldn't even say reasonable. I'd say pretty cheap, to be honest. So, Alex, if you change your prices, wait till after I make all my customization requests, please. Don't. But honestly, I do think you're not charging enough for customization, especially like what I wanted them to do. I don't know how it'll turn out. I'll let you guys know whenever I get it. But the customization was nothing for what I was asking them to do. Maybe your budget's different. You might think so. And when I get it, I will talk about that. I don't want to talk about it now. But in my mind, what I asked them to do, they did not charge me enough for. Now, I could get it and it could be garbage. And maybe I'd be like, it wasn't even worth what I paid for it. But if they do a good job with it, like what I expect, or even meet the quality of the sword that's up here, I feel like I stole from them, to be honest. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So, again, this sword is almost identical to the other ones we looked at of this same type. You'll notice it looks like, I'm actually curious, it has sort of a yellowed... What are their fittings? It says stainless steel. But when I look at these fittings for the crossguard and the pommel, they look almost bronze-ish. You know what I mean? Like, they do. They look bronze. So, I'm not sure... I'm not entirely sure if they coated the steel or what. Or maybe it's just the lighting, but it's different. It's a 16A or an 18A, to be honest. They'd probably call it a 16A, but I don't think they have hexagonal cross sections, so it's probably an 18A, minus the extra long guard. But if they want to call it a 16A, that's what I'll call it. I just don't think it is. Need another drink. Because it is what it is. It's neat, but again, all they did was really change the color. That's it. This model hasn't really done much other than change the color. So I'm going to skip down. I don't know if I want to talk about their Federschwert. They do have a Federschwert, which is interesting. I mean, okay, I'll talk about it. So, for those who don't know, and if you're watching this channel, I imagine you do. But for those who don't, a Federschwert is a sword used in HEMA training, specifically for fencing, generally sparring fencing. They are made to be more springy for safety reasons. And the blade shapes of a Federschwert are different. So they generally have what's known as a Schild, German for shield, if I pronounced it right, which flares out at the base to give it a little bit more mass, as well as protect your fingers. You have the crossguard, but it adds a little bit extra at the strong end of the blade. But then the rest of the blade is very thin to allow for a flex. Often has either a spatulated or rolled tip to allow for thrusting, where it's not going to penetrate your partner, because you won't have very many partners if you stab them all the time. So that's what it is. But they have this Federschwert, and I'll show this. I don't know. It's a Federschwert. I don't know the quality of it. Like, the big thing, I don't like this round pommel. That maybe is just aesthetics on my part. I don't like it. Kind of looks like a door handle. But then again, there's I think it's the Albion Turlane is how it's pronounced. I don't like that sword specifically because the scent stopper pummel looks like a doorknob, and I don't like it. 100% because I don't like the way it looks. Nothing to do with whether or not it actually functions. I'm sure it does. I'm just not a fan of it. You'll see here it's got a standard feather blade. Nothing special. It's got a rounded tip, which is more often than not, I believe, the standard regulation for most HEMA tournaments. Excuse me. The spatulated tips are a bit different. Again, what I've read on different tournaments is depending on the tournament itself, they may or they may not allow you to use a spatulated tip. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So you have to check with your actual tournament regulation rules to make sure that you allow a spatulated tip if you have it. I know many use the rolled tips. I know Krieger Armory generally uses the spatulated tips, but it is. Otherwise, it looks like a standard feather Schwart. The thing I'd be more curious about is... Excuse me. Oh, my goodness. I'm coughing up a storm here. I've been speaking too much. It doesn't say anywhere on here whether or not what the flex point is or what the pound pressure is. I'm not seeing it. And that's generally something that's of import when it comes to a Federschwart in certain competitions. They don't like swords that are too rigid, because if you do a thrust and it's too rigid, you could end up hurting your opponent. So they generally like them to be a bit more flexible. And a lot of them like to note what their the poundage is before the flex happens. And this one doesn't state. So unfortunately, I don't know. I've never heard of anyone using one of these. I don't know of anyone who uses one of these. So maybe if someone does, please let me know. I actually see they also have their 1016 model has a spatulated tip. And I'll look at this one. They call this one their 51-inch HEMA combat sword. It's interesting because it has a peened pummel, which is good. The cross section is different, and it has a spatulated tip, even if it's not a very wide one. So I don't know. It's got a fuller in it, and this cross section the cross guard is so strange to me. Because this is a cross section that I often see on like the Type 18C. Specifically, the one I'm thinking of is the Alexandria sword, as we know as the Alexandria. The 8 are the Brescia Spadona. Like if I open up the Albion Next Generations line here, I'd have to find it. The Brescia Spadona is the one. I think that's not there. It's under the museum line, I believe. Yeah, Brescia Spadona. You got that nice cross section there. So, or this cross guard. It's kind of neat. But it's strange to see that. So, yeah, that's what we got. So let me see, where are we at here in time? I have to try to find this out. 54 minutes. Okay, not too bad. I think I might do a part 2 of this and look at some more of these next time, because I don't want to go too long. I think I went pretty much long enough. But yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you once again. You're all awesome. Have a wonderful night, and God bless. All right.